Hey everybody, and welcome to the Jedi Jans podcast, episode 2. I want to dive right in for this episode because I do have a few topics that I wanted to hit. I actually have 3 instead of 2, like the last episode. So just to go over what the topics are going to be, I received a request that we want to kind of dive into what happens between episodes 6 and 7. So that would be Return of the Jedi to Force Awakens. You have a pretty big gap there. I believe it's the 30-year gap between those two movies, in-universe 30-year gap. So definitely looking to see what happens. A lot of interesting stuff happens in between those two movies. So we're going to deep dive into that a little bit. And then I'll have 2 top 5 lists. We're going to count down my top 5 characters who originated in the movies. And then we're going to count down the top 5 characters that originated from outside the movies. That could be from comic books, TV shows, anything that doesn't have to do with the movies. So if there's a character that shows up, if they showed up in the TV show or in the comic book, but they originated in the movies, they are disqualified from that list. It has to be a character who was originated from the expanded universe property. All right, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and start with the first topic. So, what happened between episodes 6 and 7? So, what a lot of people don't realize, you have the happy ending at the end of Return of the Jedi, and the darkness has been defeated, Emperor Palpatine's dead, Vader is redeemed, becomes Anakin Skywalker again. Luke sees all his mentors and his father at the end of the movie. Everybody's celebrating in Bright Tree Village at the end of the movie. And you get to see the galaxy kind of realizing that they're free of oppression. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the war did not end there. So there was still a lot more that happened after that. In terms of fighting, so after the Battle of Endor, the Empire, what was left of the Empire, fled. A lot of this is fleshed out in any of you who've played the video game Battlefront 2, the campaign mode in that game. It actually kind of dives in. It follows a stormtrooper who witnesses the devastation at the Battle of Endor, the Death Star being destroyed. And it's kind of her story as she realizes that the Empire isn't exactly what she always thought it was. It wasn't the organization or the infrastructure that was trying to foster peace. It was more they were trying to bring about peace through power and control instead of just, it's not freedom. So she realizes this. Most of you know who, I'm sure some of you know who I'm talking about. It's Iden Versio. But the war doesn't end at the end of Return of the Jedi. The Imperial fleet, they flee. One thing that does happen after that movie is that Han and Leia are married after that. And Luke does begin to train Leia as a Jedi during this time. So yes, Leia does become... Well, she doesn't become a Jedi. She's being trained as a Jedi, which we find out in The Rise of Skywalker, of course. But yes, Han and Leia are wed a little further down the line. So then, moving on, this is actually a year later. The war does not end for a year later, and this is when the Imperial forces mass on Jakku. Now, some of you will remember that Jakku is the desert planet that we first meet Rey in The Force Awakens. So what happens is that the Imperial fleet masses at Jakku. There's a huge battle, hence why we see all the destroyed starships in The Force Awakens. That was the battle at the end of the war. That was the end all be all at the end of the war. So Again, the war didn't end with the Battle of Endor. It actually ended with the Battle of Jakku. And it was very, very devastating for the Empire. And anything that was left of the Empire, that's when they fled to the unknown regions to rebuild, and those were the seeds of the First Order. It was a select few that were chosen to go out to the unknown regions. There were some that were left behind, as we see in The Mandalorian, which takes place 5 years after Return of the Jedi. So for those of you who are interested in some other things that happen between Episode 6 and 7, The Mandalorian is a great show to watch. It shows you what happens when the New Republic is trying to gain a foothold in the galaxy, and there's the power vacuum between... There's a huge power vacuum in the Outer Rim because the New Republic is trying so hard to gain control of the core systems that everything else to the outside is just kind of being forgotten about. And this allows some of the remnants of the Empire to flourish as warlords and so on and so forth. All right, so moving on from there, we're going to do a little bit of a time jump here. So this is 29. Right now we're at 29 years before The Force Awakens. So, like I said, it was a 30-year difference. We'd moved a year ahead. Now we're going to jump 10 years. So this is 19 years now before The Force Awakens. This is when Rey's born. So Rey is born 19 years before The Force Awakens, which makes her 19 in the movie. And then this is also the year that Luke begins training Ben Solo. So Ben, at this point, is 10 years old at this point when he begins training with Luke. Again, we have Rey being born and Ben being trained 19 years before The Force Awakens. So moving up to 13 years before The Force Awakens, Rey's abandoned on Jakku by her parents, which we see, obviously, in The Force Awakens, and then we get more of the backstory in The Rise of Skywalker, but 13 years beforehand is when the event actually occurred. Alright, so we're going to have another jump forward. This is 6 years before The Force Awakens now. This is when Princess Leia, who was a senator in the New Republic for many, many years, she is ousted from politics because it is revealed to the New Republic that she is actually Darth Vader's daughter. People didn't know this because obviously her last name was Leia Organa, and, people just assumed, oh, well, Luke Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, those two are related, but it comes out in a little bit of, you know how politicians like to dig up dirt on each other. It's revealed that Leia is the daughter of Vader, and that paints her in a negative light, and she is then ousted from New Republic politics, and this is when she starts gathering her forces to create the Resistance as we know it. And, a lot of people gave her so much trouble about that, saying that she was a warmonger. This is also the year that Ben Solo destroys Luke's temple. The night that Luke goes into the hut, senses the darkness in Ben, and then Ben, seeing his master about to kill him, that's when he completely loses it. And yes, this is the night that the temple is destroyed. And like I said, that's 6 years before The Force Awakens. So now we are moving on 5 years before The Force Awakens. This is when worlds actually start to secede from the New Republic, and this is when the First Order starts to really start forming, because the New Republic demilitarized after the Galactic Civil War. And so these are people who just don't agree with the politics of the New Republic, and it's almost like what happened in the Clone Wars when the Separatists seceded from the Republic. So this only strengthened the First Order. And then also, with the Resistance staff, Leia begins to search for Luke, because obviously Luke went into hiding after the temple was destroyed. We know that because we find him during The Force Awakens then on the island of Ahch-To. And then, of course, 5 years later, that brings us to The Force Awakens. I hope that little bit of backstory was helpful. Kind of fills in a little bit of the gaps. There's a lot of good stuff out there that goes into some nice depth. Obviously, The Mandalorian is great. I would definitely recommend watching it on Disney Plus. And there's always stuff that you can. There's always other stuff like comic books and anything that you can dig into set in between this time. But like I said, this is just kind of a rough overview of what happens, kind of digging in just a little bit deeper and giving you an idea of how the galaxy got to where it was, because everything looked like it was going to be great at the end of episode 6, and then somehow the galaxy falls back into turmoil again. So that closes the first topic. Now moving on to the second topic. This was something that was also requested, kind of. It was more of a question about my top 5 Clone Wars characters, but I figured I'd kind of break it down into 2 different lists. So I have my top 5 characters from the movies, and then I have my top 5 characters from the expanded universe, TV shows, comics, etc. So we'll start with the movie list. And I'll work from the bottom up like I did when I did the rankings of the movies. So starting at number 5 for movie characters, again, these are characters who originated in the movies. I'm going to start my list with Yoda. I remember when I was a little kid and I first saw The Empire Strikes Back. This was about the time that I had also seen E.T., and I was terrified of aliens at that point. So it's funny, Empire Strikes Back was one of those movies that I didn't watch for the longest time because Yoda was in it. But I also remember watching Return of the Jedi a lot, and Yoda was in that too. So I don't know why Yoda scared me less from Return of the Jedi, but I just, that's just the way that the mind of my my childhood self was. So, just kind of funny. But Yoda himself, just so wise. You always want to... Yoda is one of those role models. He always has the right thing to say, and when he doesn't have the right thing to say, it's usually pretty surprising. Like, I didn't realize how many mistakes Yoda had made until they went back and did the prequels, and then also when they fleshed out his character in the Clone Wars, just how many things that he got wrong. Now, granted, he also had to... He was the leader of the council. He had to listen to the council. He had to... I don't want to say cater, but he had to work with the council, and the council could sway him in certain ways, and but for the most part, Yoda was always the quintessential mentor figure. You always think of the older, wise gentleman, and Yoda is just that. And then, of course, in the prequels, when you get to see him with a lightsaber, and you get to see that he really was this great warrior, the acrobatic lightsaber style that he has is absolutely... It's over the top, but it's like over the top Star Wars, so it works. It's really weird. It's like Carl Weathers in The Mandalorian. He is so over the top in that show, but it works because it's Star Wars. I can't really explain it, but yeah, Yoda is my number 5 movie character. I'm moving on to my number 4 is Ben Solo / Kylo Ren. He was always my favorite character since The Force Awakens. I don't know if it was just the conflict inside of him, or if it was just the look, or I don't know what it was. I was just drawn to that character, and the more that I got to see him through the other movies, it just made me love him even more as a character, because I could feel how conflicted he was. You could feel that the dark side almost wasn't his choice. Like, he felt like he had no other path. And he felt like he was almost chained down by the fact that his grandfather was this incredibly evil person, and that it was just kind of his destiny to be on the dark side. But what he failed to realize is that his grandfather was also this great hero and a wonderful friend and a wonderful person before all of that happened. But it's so cool to see his conflict. And then, of course, at the end of the... Even at the end of The Last Jedi, where you just feel him, he's going full throttle on, the dark side, you can still feel every once in a while he's kind of tapping the brakes. Like, he's like, yeah, maybe I'm making the wrong decision. I don't know. But, by The Rise of Skywalker, when he is finally redeemed and we get Ben Solo, and you get to see the kind of person that Ben was, or just, well, you don't really get to see who he was, but just the little mannerism that he had during his little lightsaber fight, it was so Han Solo. I was like, that was so cool how he just kind of picked that up from his dad. And it's amazing what a little shrug can do, and just endears you to a character. There's one thing I wish we could have gotten more Ben Solo. Like, in my wildest dreams about how the Skywalker saga could have ended, I just wish that Ben could have lived, and then it just would have been so different to see how somebody who had done so many terrible things would have to atone for them. And I think that would have been really, really interesting. Now, they wouldn't necessarily have had to do it in the films, but they could have expanded on it in a comic book or in maybe a TV show. I don't know, but Ben Solo checked all the boxes for me. He was my favorite character for the sequel trilogy, and obviously one of my favorite characters in the Star Wars movies, period. So moving up to number 3, we have Obi-Wan Kenobi. Obi-Wan was my favorite character for a long, long time, and it was just because of Ewan McGregor. I loved Ewan McGregor in that role. He made the prequel movies for me. When I saw episode 1, I wanted to be Obi-Wan Kenobi. I wanted to be that young Jedi training under a wise master like Qui-Gon. And then as he grew up, like, I remember as a kid thinking, like, I wonder if I could grow my hair that long and get a mullet. I'm glad I didn't, because then in episode 3, he just had the shorter hair like Alec Guinness did. But Obi-Wan, seeing his transformation from, the young, reckless kid to eventually being the wise master, but also seeing that he made mistakes, especially in Anakin's training. Like, I feel like Obi-Wan should have been more honest with Anakin at times. And that they really do well at fleshing out in the Clone Wars, where you find out that Obi-Wan also was in love. But yet he chose a different path than Anakin, the path that a Jedi is supposed to take. And I know that they try to talk about it, but Obi-Wan never tries to see it from Anakin's point of view. He always is firm in what the Jedi code says. And I think that if Obi-Wan could have shown more understanding, things might have been different for Anakin. And then, of course, Alec Guinness in the original trilogy playing Obi-Wan Kenobi is just, you can't top that. Again, quintessential old wise man that you go to and you seek knowledge from. You find the wizard on your way to slay the dragon or whatever it is. It's part of the hero's journey, and that's what George Lucas studied while he was writing Star Wars. Joseph Campbell, the scholar who he studied from, was so interested in the links between stories and figuring out like what ties them all together, and that's how we get the hero's journey. there's these different steps that go along, and one of them is meeting the mentor. So yes, Alec Guinness totally fulfilled that, but Obi-Wan was definitely moved up on my list because of what Ewan was able to do in the prequels. So yes, thank you, Ewan McGregor. Moving up to number 2 of my favorite movie characters, Luke Skywalker. I used to pretend that I was Luke Skywalker in my grandmother's living room with a flashlight, watching Return of the Jedi, jumping from couch to couch like I was jumping from the skiff over to Jabba's sail barge. I remember that vividly. What little boy didn't want to be Luke Skywalker? Have these grand adventures with a smuggler and a giant Wookiee, and save the princess and all this grand stuff, and fight with a laser sword. Who wouldn't want to do that? So Luke had this place in my mind, and it's just he really is what we all want to be, and I think that's what makes him such a great character. He really is just a mirror image of what every little boy who's growing up wants to be. We want to be the hero. All of us wish that we could be more like Han Solo, but I think I know that for me at least, I always gravitated more towards Luke. And something I want to bring up about Luke, in The Last Jedi, a lot of people did not like Luke's portrayal in that movie. Now, I personally, I liked the way that Ryan was taking it. And don't get me wrong, I would have loved to seen Luke in all of his glory and, pulling Star Destroyers out of the sky and taking down legions of stormtroopers all on his own. But the state that Luke was in, you could just feel it. Like, we've all been broken. And I know that people say, well, Luke is the quintessential hero. He would never do that. He never gave up hope. Please, I've seen some of the most optimistic people in the world who have just completely given up after things happen to them. I've seen it too recently. It happens. People who you put up on these high pedestals, they have the same emotions that you do. I thought it was amazing that they were able to take that step and show that with Luke Skywalker. The quintessential hero who we all looked up to is a human being. So that was one thing I really, really did appreciate about The Last Jedi was it's not just a story about growing up, it's a story of growing old. But again, Luke does come to his senses at the end of the movie, and he's able to rejoin the fight and ignite the spark of hope for the galaxy. So Luke Skywalker's number 2 on my movie list. Now moving up to number 1. Anakin Skywalker, or Darth Vader. Now, this one, Anakin did not make my number 1 spot until very recently, when I realized how much internal trauma you can have. Just the broken man who was Anakin Skywalker and then became Darth Vader. Going back and watching the movies and seeing his journey, I always find myself in different parts of his story just being like, oh, if just one thing would have went differently, he never would have turned. Just seeing him be a little boy, and then a boy who becomes a Jedi, but if you want to become a Jedi, you have to leave your mother. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. You just, you gotta leave. And then after that, he develops feelings for a girl. No, you can't do that. It's not allowed. Just no, we're not going to help you with that. So then he decides, well, I'm going to do it anyway. So then he also has the weight of trying to hide that And then finally in episode 3, when everything just boils over, he wants to save his wife's life. Because the Jedi taught him... They were trying to teach him something, but they were teaching him the wrong way. They should have been teaching him that it's okay to have people in your life that you love, that you want to be there for. But when you get to the point that you feel like you can't live without them, that's when you start doing bad things. See, when I really go back and I try to understand him, that's what makes him my favorite movie character, is that I can relate to him. I've had people who tell me one thing and they could have worded it a little differently and it really could have helped me. But instead it's just making me feel a very negative way. So Anakin's turn, it's heartbreaking. Because I always... Just one thing could have changed and he might have still been good. But of course, it wasn't meant to be, and Darth Vader comes out of it. And I can't really say much else about Darth Vader, but Darth Vader is quintessential villain. He was... basically he was just a henchman in a black suit in the first movie. But in The Empire Strikes Back, you could feel this force. Like, he was just a force of nature. Like, he knew the rebels' every move, and he was ruthless, and just some of the things that he would say, like when he's talking to Lando and he keeps changing the deal on him, and he's like, I've altered the deal, pray I don't alter it any further. And then he alters it anyway, again. Like, he was just ruthless in that movie. And the way that he taunts Luke in that battle in Empire. And then finally when he reveals, like, Obi-Wan said that I killed your father. He's like, no, I am your father. And completely shatters Luke's worldview at that point. Like, Luke is thinking that he's fighting the most evil thing in the galaxy, and that, if he defeats him, it'll bring peace to the galaxy, and then boom, I'm your dad. And he's like, what? And then, of course, when Vader is able to be redeemed in Return of the Jedi, he becomes Anakin again. All because Luke never gave up on him. See, this is why I kind of have them at the top of my list, because Anakin doesn't come back without Luke. So, Luke, I say, is the co-chosen one. He's not the chosen one, because Anakin is the one who destroys Sidious, but it doesn't happen without Luke's love. And I can't stress enough that as a father, when you feel love from your children, that really can change things. So Anakin Skywalker, Darth Vader, my number one movie character. Alright. Running a little bit long, so we'll move into the next one. So top 5 expanded universe characters. Now this is in the Disney canon, so I'm not reaching out for anything Legends. For those of you who know what that means, I'm not reaching out for any Legends or anything like that. This is going to be strictly what is in the Star Wars storyline, characters who are in the real Disney approved Star Wars storyline. And we'll go from the bottom up, just like we did last time. So starting with number 5. For those of you who have watched Star Wars Rebels, I'm going with C-110P, or the astromech droid known as Chopper. I was not really into Rebels. I didn't want to watch it because I was like, oh, it's just another Disney cartoon, and they're trying to Disney-fy Star Wars. I'm not gonna like it. And I saw Ezra, and I was like, oh, it's basically just Aladdin in space. Like, it's a street rat, blah, 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 blah. But then finally, when I jumped into Star Wars Rebels, I think it was around season 2 when I jumped in, It was at the last couple episodes where Maul comes back and Ahsoka's there. That really got me into Rebels. And then I went back and watched it from the beginning, and then I had watched it ever since. But Chopper, the droid. I never knew that a droid could be so sassy. I mean, of course, C-3PO had some great, like, you know, clapback lines, but Chopper was just mean. Like you could almost understand what he was saying through his speech, like when he burp, 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 just the way that he would say it. You'd almost understand every insult that he was giving the crew. I just absolutely loved that. Like, I was like, oh, he's so feisty and he's so mean. But then you find out that Chopper actually has PTSD. He was a droid in the Clone Wars, and he was actually shot down in a Y-Wing. So he actually has post-traumatic stress from that experience. So that actually adds another layer to Chopper, which I thought was amazing. And also, Chopper's got this really, really warm heart. I know that it's weird to say that a droid has a heart, but he really does care about everybody around him. Like, when the chips are down and they need him, he's there. Chopper was just such a cool character to have in Rebels, and was so thankful that I got into the show and I was able to see that character. We're going to come back to Rebels then, so moving on to number 4, favorite expanded universe character, Captain Rex. Captain Rex, clone Captain Rex, CT-7567. When I first met Rex in the Clone Wars, I think it was actually the Clone Wars movie that I watched, you know, he was just another clone. Cool captain. I was still on the Commander Cody train. Like, I was like, yeah, go Cody. But the more that I watched Clone Wars, the more I got attached to Rex and realized, okay, yeah, he's a cool clone. And I could almost see that Rex would be one of the clones who wouldn't act during Order 66. I could see him not turning on his Jedi general, which of course is Anakin Skywalker, so he wouldn't be able to turn on him. But as it's turning out in the Clone Wars story, he actually wasn't there when Anakin raids the Jedi Temple in Episode 3. But Rex not only is in Clone Wars, he's also in Rebels, which I thought was just awesome. When you see the 3 clones, when they go looking for the great general that Ahsoka tells them that they need to find. When I saw Rex, I was like, oh, this is going to be so cool. And, you know, just to see Rex as almost like an old man, but he can still kick butt. It was so awesome to see him in Rebels and how he tied into the story. So Captain Rex, number 4. Moving up to number 3 is a fairly new character, and that is the Mandalorian, or his real name, Din Djarin. The Mandalorian, like I said, is probably my favorite piece of Star Wars that's out right now. I am always watching episodes, and I just love the character of the Mandalorian. I know a lot of people equate it to a Western in space. He almost feels like almost like if Batman were a bounty hunter. That's how I feel about the Mandalorian. And he's got a little bit of an Indiana Jones vibe in there too. Like he's kind of clumsy, but he still gets the job done. Like, yeah, that's what I really like about him, is he's not perfect. Like, you see him struggle throughout his journey, but he's still able to overcome everything because of his perseverance and his convictions, and things like that. One of my favorite scenes from the show is when he goes back in to save the child. I think it's episode 3, and literally he just starts going through hallways and destroying stormtroopers. Like, it literally was like watching John Wick, but you're seeing it with a Mandalorian. absolutely fantastic. And, you know, just to see him kind of come full circle and become a true Mandalorian. He gets his signet. He gets his jetpack. I loved him. I loved the show. So Din Djarin, or the Mandalorian, is number 3. Moving on to number 2, and this was really, really tough because 1 and 2 could really be interchangeable. So we'll say 1A and 1B. So we'll go with that. So 1B is Ahsoka Tano. I was not the biggest fan of Ahsoka when she first came out, I'll admit it. I just thought that she was bratty and whiny, and I just really didn't care for the character. But as I got more into Clone Wars and I got more invested in her, she really turned out to be an awesome character, a character that I think all of us can relate to. Just, you know, we have ups and downs in our life, and she's definitely had them. You know, being framed for murder and being expelled from the Jedi Order. Now, obviously, I don't think any of us have been that extreme, but you know, we all have ups and downs, and she really shows how we can persevere through those sorts of things and make difficult choices. When she chooses to leave the Order after they ask her back, that took guts. To leave a life that's really all you've known your whole life. I know that I've had difficult choices like that in my life, to leave the status quo for something that could potentially be better, or to stick back and just be in a really bad place. And unfortunately, I have chosen the latter a lot more times, but Ahsoka really shows us that, you know, you can make those decisions to break away. And in the Clone Wars continuation in Season 7, we're starting to see what happens after she makes that decision. But we also know what happens after that decision because she does show up in Rebels. She is actually a key part to creating the Rebel Alliance. And her and Anakin coming back together again when she has to fight Vader in Rebels was just incredible. I loved that scene. And then when we were able to see that she didn't actually die and how it actually happened, and I'm very excited to see what happens with Ahsoka in the future. I know that there's going to be more Ahsoka. I just can't wait to see what it is. So 1B is Ahsoka. Now moving on to 1A, sticking with Rebels. Kanan Jarrus, or also known by his real name, Caleb Dume. Kanan was the one thing about Rebels that stuck out to me before I even started watching the show. Like, it was like Han Solo mixed with Luke Skywalker. He was a Jedi, but yet he was a smuggler, and he was just they described him as a cowboy Jedi, and that's really what he was, especially the first 2 seasons. The struggles that Kanan goes through in that show, being blinded, but then after being blinded but finding the Force, I think that can resonate with a lot of us in terms of faith. I think a lot of us get blinded by certain things that happen in our lives, and it makes us question. But then being able to really learn to see in a different way and restore your faith. I think that's what I keep saying that. I think that's what Kanan's story is really all about. And obviously what he does for the crew at the end in Season 4 is huge. And, you know, I wish we could have more of him. So Kanan is my number 1 choice for expanded universe character. And that pretty much is going to wrap it up. I've gone a little bit longer than I wanted to, but figured I'd try to squeeze everything in. So, again, if you did enjoy this, please make sure that you leave a comment. Please hit that like button. Please, I'm trying to get ideas as to what we want to talk about. So if you have ideas, please leave comments. And we're just going to have fun talking about Star Wars. So thank you guys so much for listening. And until next time, may the Force be with you.